am so excited to introduce, again, Mr. Purpose himself. Charlie, I loved that intro. Mr. So Good, Davin Salvagno, to talk to us. Come on, give him a round of applause. Get up here, big guy. Davin is going to share with us and, again, hopefully help us close that gap. And my challenge to you as you listen to this conversation from Davin, and then we're going to lead into the last conversation, which will be about the action part of this, is focus on yourself. Where are you at? What season are you in, personally and professionally? And don't miss why you are here at the Purpose Summit 2024. Davin.
Woo! Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I want to take you back 5 years. 5 years ago, almost to the day, I am on my hands and knees on the floor of a 100-year-old gymnasium with brand new wood that they placed down in the Durfee Innovation Society, because when we came up with this crazy idea to do the Purpose Summit, the very first one ever in a repurposed school in inner city Detroit in a blighted neighborhood led by Life Remodeled and Dr. Chris Lambert, who, by the way, had a phenomenal nonprofit session today, if you didn't hear it. Hey, anyone in that session? Woo! Great things about that, brother. Great things. Hey, be proud of that. You know what I mean by that. So good. So I'm on my hands and knees on the floor in this gymnasium, and I am taking Velcro and these rolling things of felt and putting them down on the floor so we don't scratch this brand new gymnasium floor. Because what we did is we did the sponsor expo in the gymnasium, and we had all of these tables set up, and I'm there with literally just by myself setting this thing up the day before the Purpose Summit on a Sunday afternoon. And then we went into the auditorium, and I had two friends show up, and we were setting up folding chairs, one after the other, and I'm a sweaty mess. And we get done, and it's Sunday night, and I don't know who's coming the next morning. And I made the mistake of watching this thing called Fyre Fest. Did anybody ever see that? Woo! Big mistake. Huge, right? So all I'm thinking in my head as I'm laying out this felt and we're setting up these chairs and I'm looking at this empty gymnasium and I'm looking at this empty auditorium is, what if nobody shows up? And this was all for nothing. And the next morning, doors open with no marketing, no real money, just an idea and sweat labor and some people who believed in this thing. 300 people walked into the auditorium of Durfee Innovation Society, and we had a 2-day conversation that was absolutely transformative. And things didn't go the way that we thought they would. We had plans, we had goals, we had expectations. We didn't deliver on them. And you know what I was thinking about for those entire 2 days? What we didn't accomplish. And you know what Dr. Chris Lambert said to me? Be proud of this. And those words carried me from that moment forward to this mission that we are now on together. That was a springboard to what led to a multiple city speaking tour. I had the opportunity to speak on stages across the country with different companies, with different organizations on this concept of the power of purpose, which was the keynote talk that I gave at the summit in 2019. And then that conversation led to writing a book called Helping People Find Purpose at Work. And I struggled to write this book. I was not a writer. I was not an author. Every time I tried to sit down and write, I couldn't gather my thoughts. I was distracted. And I was thinking, what if I write this book and no one reads it? No one buys it. And it's all for nothing. And then my wife and I get invited to this conference in November. We're excited to go to this conference. It was at the Boca Raton Resort in Florida. Everything paid for. We desperately needed it because we've got 2 young kids. We had not been on a vacation in 3 years by ourselves, and I was so looking forward to this. And 3 days before the trip, she gets pneumonia. and we can't go. And the organizers say, no problem. Listen, we've got a makeup conference in Laguna Beach, California. And so I said, great, we'll be there. When is it? And they said February 27th and 28th. And so one of the organizations that I was speaking with at the time had a client out in California, and I called them and said, hey, listen, I'm coming in town to this conference. I really enjoyed our time together. I would love to get together and have dinner with you the night before. Are you available? And they said, when are you coming in? And I said, the 26th. And they said, could you come in on the 25th? And I said, why? And they said, because we've got this meeting that we're having, and we'd love to have you speak at it. Can you come in a day early? And I said, yeah, I would love to. And so now I'm coming in a day early, and I'm going to speak at this thing, and then I'm going to go to this other conference, and then I'm going to come home. And then I get another phone call from another company that says, hey, we heard you're coming to the West Coast. Will you come to Lake Tahoe on March 5th? We've got a symposium at Lake Tahoe. And I'm like, well, I'm already on the West Coast, so I'm not going to fly all the way back home and then fly back to California. So while I'm there, why don't I just stay on the west side? And I'll use the time in between March 1st, 2nd, and 3rd to get the book done that I've been struggling to write. Sit at the Marriott Cliffs Resort, look over the Pacific Ocean, and just spend some time writing. And so then I get this phone call. And the phone call is from the Ken Blanchard companies. Now, Ken Blanchard had been a mentor of mine for 20 years. I learned so much about servant leadership, how to lead people, how to lead organizations from Ken Blanchard. And I get this incredible phone call from Michelle Schoen, who's in the back of the room, and she says, would you come to our channel partner conference in San Diego? And I said, when's the channel partner conference? And she said, March 1st and 2nd. And I said, you know, it's amazing that you're asking me that because I'm actually going to be in Laguna Beach the weekend before, and I have to go to Lake Tahoe there. Yeah, I'll just change my flights. I'll drive down to San Diego. I'll come to your conference, and then I'll fly to Lake Tahoe, and then I'll fly home. By the way, this is February and March of 2020. I show up in San Diego, and Michelle says, Davin, we are so glad that you're here. Thank you so much for coming. And I said, Michelle, I am so grateful to be here. Ken has poured so much into my life. I can't wait to learn from all the channel partners, be able to pour back into their lives. And I've always wanted to meet Ken. Is he going to be here? And she says, he just walked in behind you. And I turned around, and I said, Ken, I've waited 20 years to meet you. And he says, I won't hold that against you, young man. Tell me, have you had eggs? And I said, have I had eggs? He's like, why don't we go get some eggs? And he puts his arm around me, and he's got his cane, and we walk to a round table like this in the back of the conference room, and we sit there for an hour, and he's talking to me, and he's asking me all these questions. I had all these questions that I wanted to ask him, and I didn't get I couldn't ask because he was just so interested in me. And then he said, have you written anything on this purpose stuff yet? Because what you have to say is really important, and people need to hear it. And I said, actually, I'm supposed to be writing a book right now on Laguna Beach, but I changed my flights to come down here to be here for your channel partner conference. And he said, when that book is finished, will you send it to me because I'd like to write the foreword to that book? And my mouth falls. I'm texting my wife. I'm sitting having breakfast with Ken Blanchard. He just wrote the foreword of my book. And I can't believe that this moment is happening. And I spend the rest of the day with Ken. I'll never forget that day. And that night, I'm sitting at his dinner table. I still have the picture of Michelle of Ken and I with the little button that says, I love Ken. And his wife, Margie, it literally was a button that said, I love Ken on my lanyard. Not in that way. No, but really, I do. He's a mentor. But we get done dinner, and his wife, Margie, was sick that night. And he goes, okay, I need to go home to my bride, so please excuse me. And he gets up, and he starts walking to the door, and then he stops. And he grabs his cane. And he points it at me, and he says, now you better get writing, young man. I'm not getting any younger. And I left, and I got on that plane, and I started typing. I went to Lake Tahoe. I finished my talk at Lake Tahoe. That's March 5th. I come home March 6th, and what happened 6 days later? The world shut down. And that was a tough time. And I was thrust into the basement, and I finished that book because all I was thinking is, gosh, what if something happens initially to Ken before I finish writing this book? What if he gets COVID? And then I thought, what if I get COVID and I can't finish the book? What are the words that I want to depart and leave on the world if I get COVID and I'm not going to be here? Because we were all suddenly thrusted into our mortality during COVID. And so that kind of gave us the courage to be our most vulnerable selves in that moment. And somewhere over the last 5 years, I think we've lost that. And as terrible as COVID was, I think there's a learning moment in there for us. And so we emerge out of COVID and we say, you know what, we need to do the Purpose Summit again. And we don't know where we're going to do it because conferences are illegal in Michigan at the time. And so we're trying to figure out how could we possibly do this. And we get this phone call from someone who came to the first Purpose Summit in 2019. And they said, you should do the Purpose Summit in Mount Clemens, Michigan. And I said, who's going to come to Mount Clemens, Michigan for the Purpose Summit? And he said, you didn't think 300 people were going to show up in a repurposed school building in a blighted neighborhood in Detroit. And I was like, whew, okay. Let's figure out how to do the Purpose Summit in Mount Clemens, Michigan, right? This town that is economically challenged about 30 minutes north of Detroit. And so we start walking the city, and there's this old abandoned theater. And he said, what if you did your keynotes in this theater? And I said, well, that's great, but where would we do the breakout sessions? Well, Oakland University had just opened up a school across the street. And he says, well, what if you did the breakouts at Oakland University? And I said, well, that would be awesome. We could do that there across the street. But how would we feed people? Where would we hold a reception? And he said, what if we partnered with the city and we closed the street in between and we put up wedding tents and we had all of the restaurants that were struggling economically due to COVID cater the dinner, and we just did tickets and we figured out how to reconcile it afterwards. And a vision came together and an amazing team. People like Lisa Oprita and Adam Ritchie and Corrine Forrest. Literally over the next days, we spent on the floor in a theater, setting up chairs, setting up a sign. I remember Corrine and I setting up a sign that said Purpose Summit across the bottom, and the P kept on falling, and we kept on trying to stick it up with tape over and over. And Corrine's like, you know, if I just have to stand behind this P the entire time, I'll stand behind this P the entire time. She's got a weird sense of humor. I love her dearly. You got to meet her if you haven't met her. So the Purpose Summit happens, and this company from South Bend, Indiana shows up, and they bring 26 leaders to the Purpose Summit, led by Dr. Amber Selking, who you've met here tonight. And we were in crisis mode because, as I shared before, people were showing up. We weren't ready. They came off. They saved us. And then they said, hey, this is an incredible transformative leadership experience. And Dr. Amber Selking says, what if we did this in Indiana? And I said, well, where would we do it in Indiana? And she said, well, what if we did it at the University of Notre Dame? I said, we could do that? She says, well, I'm the mental performance coach of Notre Dame football. I'm an adjunct professor. Let me make a phone call. And she makes a phone call. And then a few days later go by, and she says, hey, I was doing laps around Notre Dame Stadium, and I just felt I needed to stop here. And she took a picture of the side of the stadium, and she sends it to me. And she says, this is where the Purpose Summit's going to be next year. And I said, Notre Dame Stadium? What happens if it rains? What if it rains? We can't get 80,000 people into a stadium. She's like, I don't know what to tell you. This is where the Purpose Summit's going to be. What I didn't know was at the top of Notre Dame Stadium was a glass ballroom that looked like suites, that overlooked the field, that fit 1,000 people. And so now we're like, okay, we could see how this happened. Our team got together, and we said, do we move the summit from our Detroit market to Notre Dame? What if nobody else comes? What if we don't get the sponsors? What if it's a failure? And we went to Notre Dame, and 500 people and over 200 companies from across the country descended on South Bend, Indiana. People flew from Europe to Chicago and rented cars to go to South Bend for the Purpose Summit in 2022. And then we did it again. And then companies like Broad River Retail and Coca-Cola Consolidated and others came to South Bend, and they said, you know, what if you did something like this in Charlotte? Maybe not this, but maybe something like this in Charlotte. Those were actually Charlie Maloof's exact words. And I said, well, what if we did the Purpose Summit in Charlotte? And then we started to struggle with, but what if people didn't come? What if we couldn't find the sponsorships to pull it off? What if it was a failure? You see, I had all of these what ifs in my head and it could have gone either way. But what if your what if is an invitation to your purpose? You see, right now, there are a bunch of thieves that are trying to rob you of the purpose that you are meant to step into when you leave the Purpose Summit this year. There is conviction within you about things that maybe you need to change in your life, things you need to change in your organization, things you need to change in your marriage, things that you need to change in the way that you parent, things that you need to change in the way that you lead others. But there's distraction, there's comparison, there's fear, worry, doubt, unbelief, and excuses that are preventing you from stepping into the purpose that you know in the depths of your soul that you are supposed to step into when you leave here today. And I want to challenge you today. The only difference between which way those what ifs end up is your belief. The question doesn't change. The question is what if. But the deeper question is, what is it that you believe? Because the outcome of that what if is directly tied to your level of belief. Now let me tell you about how this almost didn't happen, and how the person standing before you today, 5 days ago, was on his hands and knees again, but this time not rolling out felt, but in a weeping puddle of mess with my wife's arms wrapped around me and me saying, I don't want to do this anymore. It's too much. It's too hard. It's too much of a burden to bear. You see, we poured everything that we had into this. Everything. All of our life savings, leveraged our home, all of it. Because we believe that each and every single person should step into the purpose that they were created for. We believe that every single organization should step into the purpose beyond just profit that they exist for, to change the world, to change the 85% that I talked about earlier that wake up every day without purpose, without meaning, without fulfillment in their life, so that they could go home and give their families their best instead of their leftovers, so that they could put their head on their pillow at night and know that you made a difference, that this is why I got up today. We believed we could do that. And you see, to put something like this on, in addition to amazing people, amazing partners, amazing supporters, it takes finances. It takes leveraging what you have. And so we had this line of credit that every single year we kind of leverage to put this on, and then after the summit, we always reconcile it with, sponsors and then tickets for next year and all that. And we do this dance every single year. Like, are we going to have enough? What if we don't have enough? And every year it happens. People show up, it happens. But this time, on Thursday last week, I went to go pull our line of credit to cover this wonderful experience that we all got to enjoy. And for the first time in 3 years, the bank called me and they said, what do you need this money for? And I said, for the summit that we do every single year. And they said, well, we recently changed our policy, and we now need to approve every single withdrawal. We'll get back to you. And I get an email as soon as I hang up the phone that says, your request is denied, your account suspended for 30 days. 5 days ago. And all I'm thinking about is, how are we going to feed the people who are coming? How are we going to put this thing on? And I fall to my knees, and I look at my wife, and I say, I don't want to do it anymore. It's just too hard. And she says, get up. Get up. There's a reason that you were chosen for such a time as this. And the next morning, I went into the office, and Lisa looks at me, and she goes, listen, they're coming. One way or another, they're coming. So we need to figure this thing out. You don't have time for this pity party. Get up. And I get up. And I start praying and trying to figure out, what are we going to do? And in that moment, Roger Norberg, our chair from C12, happened to be walking down the streets in downtown Rochester and stops in our office and says, hey, I was in town and I felt I needed to come in and give you a hug. And he walks in, and I tell him what happened. And he says, can I send out a prayer message to all of our C12 members? I said, please do. So he does. And we're sitting in our conference room. Lisa is literally putting stickers on name badges of people who waited till last week to register. Thank you, each and every single one of you who did that. Because we have to order those name badges like 2 weeks in advance. There's a reason there's a cutoff date. And then she manually, literally puts stickers on every single name badge. And Adam Ritchie is working with this Cricut to put the little tiny little letters on there underneath each and every single one of them. And I'm on my computer doing something. I don't know what I was doing. It was all a blur. And I get this text message from John Sanchez, our CPA, who says, call me. I think I can help you out. And I called John, and I said, John, what's going on? He goes, I'm sitting in McNamara Airport with my son. We're about to go on a fishing trip, and our plane is delayed. And I'm at the gate, and I'm reading my emails, and I see Roger's prayer request. So I start praying, hang my phone up, and then I get a phone call from one of my other clients. And the client says, hey, John, listen, I got a question. I'm sitting on some money in the bank, and it's not really getting good interest, and I don't want to put it in the market because it's too risky. I want to do something special with it. You have any ideas? And John says, I got to tell you about my friend Davin and this Purpose Summit thing that they do. Maybe it's something you might want to help out with, maybe not, but I'll have you talk to him. He says, tell him to give me a call. So I call Jim and tell him the whole story, and Jim says, hey, this sounds really great. Let me get my son Greg on the phone. He handles kind of all of our affairs. And Greg gets on the phone, and he says, yep, sounds great. Do you have a good attorney? And I said, yes, I have a good attorney, but I don't know if we're going to turn this around with my attorney in time that we need to turn this around, if you know how sometimes attorneys work. No offense to any attorneys who are in the room, right? And I don't want to be billed by hour for doing that. So, but anyway, we have a great attorney. They're a great legal team. But he says, okay, well, let me see what we can do. I'll get back to you by the end of the day. End of the day comes, nothing. Next morning, Friday morning. Today's Tuesday, folks. This is Friday. I'm in my office, and we have a Friday morning C12 call, me, Roger, Adam, and a couple other people. And every Friday morning, we've got this call from 8:30 to 9:30. And we're talking about things for C12. And then at 9:23, Adam says, you know, I've been doing these like 7-minute pop-up prayer moments. And maybe you should do that. And it's 9:23, and Roger says, well, there's 7 minutes left in the call. Why don't we end the call so you can do that? And then he looks at me and he says, when's the last time you played that piano behind you? Because I've got a piano in our office because I lead worship at our church. And I said, you know, Roger, it's been a minute. He goes, well, why don't we hang up the phone and why don't you go spend some time at the keys? Now, Nick Craig will tell you that the way that I often handle stress is sitting at a piano, and he encourages me that I should do it more often. And I hadn't done it in a while in our office. So I go and I sit at the piano, and it's just me in the office, and I finish playing at exactly 9:30, and Lisa Oprita walks in the door, and she's like, it's go time. Let's pack it up. We need to get to Charlotte. We're flying out on Sunday. And I look at my email, and there's the promissory note from Greg from the night before, and says, my father, Jim, will be in touch. Meet him at the bank at noon. I call Jim. I have to drive a half hour to meet him in the bank. I drive him to the bank. I walk in, and there's this guy, Jim, 91 years old with a cane, and he's standing there. And he says, Davin, I'm so glad you're here. It's great to meet you. I heard your great story. We'd love to help you out. And he says, here's the terms, here's the payback period, all that stuff, blah, blah, blah. He goes, tell me more about this summit. And I tell him I said, I can't thank you enough for what you're allowing to make happen for all of these people who don't even know you next week in Charlotte. And we handle what we need to handle, and then we sit down. And he goes, tell me, you know a lot of business people. Why didn't you just ask for the money? And I said, because, Jim, I've never asked anybody for money. It just feels uncomfortable to do that. I've shared them with the situation, and I just kind of left it up to God for him to put it upon the hearts of those that might want to step in. And he goes, well, why me? And I said, Jim, I don't know. But what if there's a reason that we're supposed to meet? What if I'm supposed to help your son in some way in the future? What if I'm supposed to help your family in some way in the future? I don't know why you're here, but I know there's a what if. And I can't wait to see what that what if is. And so then he says, okay, well, I wish you well on your summit. And we start walking to the door. And I said, this has been such an incredible moment in this journey for us. I'm writing a second book called The Thieves of Purpose, the things that rob us of our purpose, like comparison, distraction, doubt, worry, fear, excuses, unbelief. But I'm struggling to finish the book, and it's due to my publisher at the end of June. And I've got the summit, and then I need to go to Europe I get to go to Europe for a speaking thing, and then come back, and then we're hopefully moving from Michigan to Charlotte in June or July, and somewhere along that lines, I need to finish a book and get it to my publisher at the end of June. And I'm struggling. What if I don't get it done? And he looks at me, and I said, I want to include this story in the book, if that's okay. And he said, that would be wonderful. I'm honored. Thank you. And we start walking out, and he stops. And he turns to me, and he points his cane. And he says, now you better get writing, young man. I'm not getting any younger. And I said, Jim, I know it was why it was you. Sit back down. I have a story to tell you. You see, we don't know why the circumstances that we are in happen. They are layered with what ifs. And those what ifs are laced with fear, doubt, and unbelief. And a couple years ago, a dear friend of mine who I've known for 15 years came to our home church of Rock Point, and he delivered this amazing message called Do It Afraid. And it was at a really, really challenging time in our life that I wanted to give up, that I didn't want to do it anymore. And we came back from that service, and my wife has this little board that she puts little letters on with cute little sayings, and it sits in our kitchen. And I came home that day, and it just said, Do It Afraid on the board. And every single day, I would get up. And when I didn't want to step into my what if, I would look at that, and I would remember Kent's voice, Do It Afraid. Every single time it got hard, I remembered Kent's voice, Do It Afraid. And so there is a what if in your life right now. There are circumstances that you don't understand why maybe you were led to the edge of the Red Sea and it didn't part. There are circumstances that you don't understand why the provision didn't come in the way that you needed to come when you needed to come. There are challenges that you are facing that you are trying to make sense of, and you quite can't. But I promise you, you might not know it today. You might not know it 3 days from now. You might not know it 3 years from now. You might know it 5 years from now. But there is a what if in there that if you continue to press through and do it afraid, your story is going to be an inspiration for someone else who is dealing with their what if. And so I want to encourage you. Thank you. I want to encourage you to lean in. I want to encourage you to lean in to the what ifs in your life without doubt, without unbelief, but maybe with fear. And maybe that fear is healthy. Because for me it was. Because I had this message of do it afraid. You see, fear sometimes can be an indication that the thing that you are meant to step most into is the purpose that you were created most for. So I want to end my talk by inviting to the stage a dear friend of my life who we might not be here without tonight, who's given me this message and inspiration of do it afraid because he stepped into his own what if. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Kent Chevalier.
Good evening, everybody. Man, Davin, thank you for the opportunity to be able to be here tonight. I'm just really excited and honored to share my story with all of you. And I want to begin tonight by asking you this question. What has fear robbed you of in your life? Think about it. What has fear robbed you of in your marriage, in your business? The fear of failure, the fear of the what if, the fear of not having enough, the fear of the unknown. And so I'm just honored to be able to share this story with you. I'm still living this story, and we're in the process of still doing this what if afraid. And so I just want to simply share with you tonight my journey of becoming the chaplain to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I know that there are some Pittsburgh Steelers fans in the house, right? Right on. So before this role as chaplain to the Steelers, I was in student ministry for 10 years. I was a youth pastor for 10 years. That's how I met Davin, okay? And then for 12 years, I was a pastor of a great church in Pittsburgh. It was about year 10 into serving at that church in Pittsburgh that something changed inside of me. Now, my role didn't change. My responsibilities at work did not change, but something inside of me changed. Has anybody ever had that feeling? Right? You just know in your knower. That's what I like to call it. You know in your knower that something shifted. But here's the thing. I was really hesitant to chase whatever that feeling was, because the last time that I chased that, it did not end well for me. And it hurt. Not only me, but my wife and my kids and a whole bunch of other people. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore that I had this feeling God was doing something in me, and I didn't want to chase it because I was comfortable. I was good. I had a great position going on. And I'm just wondering if there might be anybody here who might be having those same kind of feelings, especially with what it is that we're hearing at the Purpose Summit. Maybe you're here today and you have an idea that would change the trajectory of your business, but because you've got it so good at work where you are right now, you don't want to pitch that idea to your boss and upset the apple cart. Let's get personal. Maybe you're here and you've been dating her for a really long time, and you know that you want to be with her, but you're scared to really pop the question and really commit to her because you're good in your relationship where it is. Maybe you're here today, and you know what? It's time for you to leave the nest and start something new, but you've got it so good where you are, and it's hard to cut that cord. But here's the thing. I believe that there are going to be those times in our lives where God begins to mess us up on the inside until we step into that thing that He's calling us to do. And so I have to warn us, because some of us, especially entrepreneurs, especially business folks, right? See, I'm a ministry guy. I'm a chaplain. And so this is wild for me to be with a whole bunch of business people, because you all act. You make decisive decisions. You go for it. But this is where many of us get into trouble. And I'm speaking from experience here. We move into that new thing before God tells us to. Right? So we experience that holy frustration inside of us, and then we get antsy in that waiting, and so we grab onto the first thing that comes along. It's got to be that next position, that next job. I've got to go get it, or the next house. I've got to get that. You know, if you're hiring somebody, we got to fill this position, so it's got to be the next person. Let's go. But this is where we get into trouble, and I'm speaking from experience here. And I've learned from past failures in my life and then great insights from my mentors this lesson. Here it is coming up on the screen. God's timing is just as important as His direction. God's timing is just as important as direction. So I learned my lesson from those failures, and so this time I was going to wait for God's timing. And watch this. Any San Francisco 49ers fans in the room? Okay, good. Great Super Bowl last year, right? Brock Purdy, love that dude. Great stuff. Watch this. It was about 2 years into that frustration and waiting that the San Francisco 49ers, they traded their tight end to the Pittsburgh Steelers. His name is Vance McDonald. Okay, and Vance McDonald, he began to attend the church where I was pastor all of those years. And so he came to church, and after the service, I said, man, I'd love to meet anybody who's new here today. Welcome. And he made a beeline after service, and he said, man, can we grab a cup of coffee? And that day, man, we grabbed a cup of coffee, and we talked for a few hours. And it was there that he shared with me that the Steelers didn't have a chaplain, and something jumped inside of me when he shared that. And I was like, what's that? What does a professional sports chaplain do? I had heard of like army chaplains, hospital chaplains, but I hadn't really heard of like NFL chaplains. What in the world do they do? And so Vance and I, we would get to know each other. In that off season, we would grab some time and coffee and conversation. He eventually said, hey man, would you mentor me? Like disciple me and a few of my buddies. And I said, fire up, man, let's go. Let's get to know each other. And so here's what Vance would do. At the end of our group, we would share prayer requests with each other. And Vance would always say, I wish that we could do what we're doing now in the Steelers locker room. And every time he shared that prayer request, something would jump inside of me. And I began to wonder, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Like, how does somebody become an NFL chaplain? Like, I didn't have a category for any of this. And I began to, like, go home to Erica and share with her, like, hey, this is what Vance is kind of saying and all this stuff. And she's like, well, talk to him about it. How does this work? And so I eventually got up the courage to ask Vance, like, bro, are you dropping hints as prayer requests? Have any of you ever done that before? Right? And do you think that maybe I'm supposed to be the chaplain for the Steelers? And he goes, no, not really, but if you're interested. And so with foot in my mouth, here's what he says. I don't know how this works either, but why don't I introduce you to Coach Tomlin? Now, you got to understand, I grew up in Pittsburgh. I'm a huge Steelers fan. And so either way, this is going to be awesome because I get to have lunch with Coach Tomlin. Are you kidding me? So we go to lunch in the Steelers practice facility, Vance, me, Coach Tomlin, and I can tell that Coach Tomlin is like vetting me. Like, what's this guy's motives? Is he just trying to get close to guys? And so he invited me to hang out at what the NFL calls OTAs, organized team activities. They're not really allowed to practice, but they're just kind of hanging out, getting to know each other, lifting weights. Why don't you come and hang out with the guys? Then he invited me, once minicamp began, he said, man, I would love for you to come and preach at minicamp chapel. So everybody, I was so excited. Oh my goodness, I couldn't believe that I would get this opportunity to go to the Steelers practice facility, see all the real 6 Super Bowl trophies. I was geeking out. This is amazing. And then came the time for chapel, and I got to preach with everything that I had, man, and I was so excited in that moment. And it ended with Coach Tomlin saying to me, I'll be in touch. So I was so anxious, and I was like, I can't wait to hear back from him. A day goes by, nothing. 3 days go by, nothing. A week goes by, nothing. 10 days go by, nothing. And so I began to sink back into that confusion, back into that waiting. Have any of you ever done something like that where you actually stepped out? And you tried something, you went for it, but then there's that wait before you land. It's like when we were little kids. You remember when we jumped off the high dive, right? And there was that moment before your feet actually hit the water, and you're like, why did I do this? Right? You question your decision-making skills. Like, why did I even go through with this? So in this moment, while I'm waiting to hear back, I was just confused. Like, God, I thought this was you. I thought this was you kind of prompting this, like going for it. So I was frustrated. Again, 2 years, 3 years had gone by. I'm waiting to hear back, and I still have a job to do, so I have to go out and do some training that I was a part. We were starting something brand new at my church, and so we went out in that moment to California, and we were starting this at my church, and so they were helping us kind of experience it for the first time ourselves. And so they sent us out on what they called a guided prayer experience. And so I don't know if you've ever done something like this before, but basically what they said is just simply follow the prayer guide. So we've got some passages that are in there, and we would encourage you to journal down your thoughts on those passages. And so I open up my prayer guide, and basically here's what's at the very top of that page. Isaiah 43, forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. See, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way. So I began to write out my prayers, my thoughts to God about that particular passage. And so just a moment of vulnerability before all of you. This is a page out of my journal. So here's what I said to God. God, I'm trying to discern the new that you're doing in my life. Is it at Northway? That's my church. Or is it with the Steelers? Is it with both of them? Is it something else completely different? Either way, God, I need clarity. And so I lay all of this down at your feet because I'm anxious to know what you want for me and my family and my church family. You may have something else entirely in mind, but I can sense that you've been up to something new for a long time in my life. You can hear the frustration in there, right? So then I put the pen down and I go on to the next passage, and I don't have all kinds of time to explain this passage, but Ezekiel 37, 1 through 9, and I'm not going to preach here today. That's not my role. I'm just here to tell you my story. And essentially, what I got from this passage as I read it, essentially what happens is God downloads a vision to a man by the name of Ezekiel with a really powerful lesson in it. And here was the lesson. God said to Ezekiel, I want you to say exactly what I tell you to say. And Ezekiel said it, and boom, a supernatural move of God begins to take place. God then says again to Ezekiel, now I want you to do exactly what I tell you to do. And Ezekiel did it, and boom, a supernatural move of God continued to take place. And then this particular passage of Scripture in that prayer guide ended with this. Take a look at this. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, that I have done what I said. Yes, the Lord has spoken. And at that very moment, I don't know how to explain it to you, but I just knew that something was about to break through in my 3-year waiting period. So this is what I wrote to God. I have a great thing going with my church, God. I'm just wondering what you're doing with the Steelers chaplain role. And then I asked him this question. Am I initiating that? Because if so, I lay it down and I'll continue to wait for you. Because how many of us know that when we initiate something, we have to sustain it in our own strength, in our own power, in our own resources, in our own ideas. But when God initiates something, He permeates it with His strength, with His provision, with His ideas. And I wanted what He wanted. And so I said, God, I lay it all down. If I'm initiating it, I lay it down, and I will wait for you. As soon as I wrote that, the trainers came up over the loudspeakers, and they said, Ollie, income free, prayer experience is over, come back into the room. And so I started gathering up my things, and I kid you not, everybody, this is the power of writing things down in a journal. Because at 10:24 a.m. California time, Coach Tomlin texted me. And he said, can you grab lunch in the next few days to talk about the position? My hands trembled, everybody. As I began to call my wife, and I said, I think I'm about to become the chaplain to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, mind you, he hadn't even offered me the position, but I just knew something was about to happen. So I go to lunch with Coach T, and it was an amazing lunch. I loved everything that he was saying. Here's what he said first. I'm looking for a local Pittsburgh couple to be pastors to this team. And I was like, I get to do this with my wife. This is awesome. And then he lays out his vision for the chaplain role, and he says, man, I would love for you to do Bible studies for the players and Bible studies for the coaches and Bible studies for the support staff. And I would love if your wife would do that for the coaches' wives and the players' wives and girlfriends and for the front office ladies. And then, man, if you could do a couples ministry together. And I loved everything that I was hearing Coach T saying until he said this. This position is not hired by the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I would love for you to consider joining the staff of Athletes in Action. To which I knew exactly what that meant for me. See, I've known people who have served with Athletes in Action, which, if you don't know what that is, it is a sports ministry of the missions organization Cru, formerly known as Campus Crusade for Christ. And I knew that all of those people, they had to raise their full-time salaries. They had to raise their, benefits. They had to raise all of their budgeting. And so in my mind at that point, I'm like shutting it all down. I'm like, this would be crazy. Have you ever done this where you're, somebody's talking to you, but you're having a conversation or thinking about somebody? So I'm having it out with God in this moment. I'm like, God, you got to be kidding me, man. Like, I got 3 teenage daughters. You know that, right? I'm staring college tuition right in the face, man. I got 3 weddings that I need to financially plan for. It would be insane for me. There's no way that you want me to step away from a secure income and a great position to become a full-time missionary. There's got to be another way. And very quickly, you can see where my internal reaction was revealing where I placed my trust. And my trust was in a paycheck. My trust was in a position. My trust was in me, providing for my family, instead of the God that I've been preaching for 25 years. And I say that out loud now as a pastor, and I get embarrassed by that. But I have a feeling I'm not the only one here. Can anybody else relate? So the meeting ended with me cordially agreeing, because that's what you do with Mike Tomlin, right? I said all the right things, and I said, man, I'll continue down the search process. But internally, I was shutting it all down. I went home to Erica, and bottom line, everybody, I was afraid to step out like that. But we both shut it down. I'm like, this is insane, God. It was revealing where we were, but here's the thing. I gave Coach T my word. We couldn't shut down the process, so we agreed that we would fast and we would pray to see if this was really God. And one day, I kid you not, everybody, this is wild. As Erica was on our back patio, she was praying, and I'm inside and I'm reading, and all of a sudden I hear my wife, get out here. And I'm like, whoa. I come outside, and the fern is moving beside my wife. And immediately, I'm going, I think it's a snake. And I'm freaking out. And she's freaking out. She's like frozen. But I got to man up in this moment. So I go to find a stick, and I'm like inching over to the fern. And like, let's see how close I can get. And as soon as I got close enough, a bird flew out of the fern, and I opened up inside, and there was a baby bird's nest with 3 little eggs inside of it. And over the next couple of weeks, as Erica and I prayed and we fasted and we considered this position, those baby bird eggs, they hatched. And we heard them chirping, feed me, right? However they chirped, right? And Mama Bird would come in and she would feed them. And Daddy Bird was perched up on our light pole, and he was making sure that we weren't going to mess with his kids. And all of a sudden, in my mind and in hers, we remembered the words of Jesus that I've read so many times. Look at this. Look at the birds of the air. They don't sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than a bird? I mean, you can see that God was really taking us to school about what it is that we were trusting in this life. So in that moment, Erica and I decided together in unity that we would put our feet in our family where our mouth had been all of these years. And so we took the step, please watch this, with fear fighting our faith. And even though we were still afraid, we decided we're going to do this. And so we flew out to Colorado. And this happened to coincide with Athletes in Action meeting together with all of the crew, other missionaries, 6,000 plus missionaries. And this is where we signed on the dotted line. We did it. We stepped out to become full-time missionaries. But to be honest, we were freaking out. And you wouldn't blame us, right? We were freaking out in this moment. Even though we knew that this was something that God's calling us to do, Erica will tell you if she was here, how she deals with stress as she goes for a run. And so that night that we signed on the dotted line, it was a bad night. I mean, if I'm honest with you, fellas, just imagine your wife has locked herself in the bathroom and all you hear is, and I'm like, what did I do? Right? And I wake up the next morning and she's not in the bed. And I didn't know where she went. And I'm like, oh, great. This is getting to be too much for her. But here she had gone on a run to just clear her head. And on the side of the road in the middle of Colorado State University, we didn't even know where we were. She had this moment where she broke down. She was crying out to God saying, I need something to make sure that you're in this. So God, please. Have you ever had that kind of moment? God, please, come on. But I didn't know she was doing any of this. So she comes back and we get ready for the last particular portion of the sessions that we could attend. Now imagine this, everybody. Colorado State University. There is a giant basketball coliseum, and in the center court of their basketball floor, there's a giant round stage. Have you ever been a part of a concert like this? Well, we had floor seats. And we were on this side of the round stage, and on the other side of the round stage, there was a painter who was painting during the singing, the worship portion. And if you've never heard 6,000 plus missionaries worshiping, oh my goodness, it was a powerful moment. But we cannot see what the painter is painting because the canvas back is what we can see. And the camera is intentionally not revealing what he's painting so furiously. But then the music dies down. And the camera pans back. And what do you think that the painter painted that day? Take a look. Erica and I just looked at each other and we wept. Like, come on, that's so specific. And even though we were still afraid, we left that day confident that God was going to take care of us every step of the way. And so as I close here today, the reason that I share our story with you is because I wonder if there might be somebody here today who has grown too comfortable. And you're trusting in a paycheck. You're trusting in a great position. You're trusting in a person instead of God. And you know that God has been calling you to step into something, but you're hesitating. You're killing that dream that's been inside of you. You've squashed the idea because someone just told you it's just too risky. It doesn't make logical sense, but you know in your knower that you're supposed to do it. So Davin invited me to encourage somebody today to do it afraid. To do it afraid. So man, you've been dating her too long. It's time to pop the question. Do it afraid, right? It is time for you to pitch that new idea to your boss. Do it afraid. It's time for you to start that new thing that you have been dreaming of. Do it afraid. Man, it is time for you to get rid of the safety net and step into the what if. Do it afraid. This world needs that new idea. Do it afraid. Please do not let fear rob you of what God has for you. So I don't know what it is for you, Purpose Summit. You know it in your knower what God's calling you to do. I just came here to encourage somebody to trust God and to do it afraid. I want to thank you all for allowing me to be able to be here. I am just honored that Davin would allow me to be and share my story with this absolutely amazing community. God bless.